Good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of Tactegra, I'd like to welcome you to our Project Success Leadership webinar. Today, we're going to discuss the continuous improvement project that we did to find out what the root causes of project failure were and to give you some tools and techniques that you can use to increase the chances that your project will succeed. So you've probably heard in literature and just in general discussion that between 50 and 90% of projects fail. And when we say this, what we mean is that it doesn't just mean that the project is binary, that it fails. It normally also means that the project did not accomplish what the goal of the charter was when they started. And when you think about projects, project success lead to predictable outcomes. They lead to corporate or organizational benefits and ultimately lead to project success. So if you go out and you Google project failure, you'll see lots of materials on why projects fail. But what you won't see is potential solutions, or nobody really talks about root cause, or they don't really do any deep dive. So Tactegra is a management consulting firm, and our roots are in Six Sigma. So we decided to execute this as a Six Sigma project using the define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. And as we dug in, I'm going to share with you what we found, and again, some tools and techniques that you can use to improve the likelihood that your project will succeed. So again, 50 to 90% of projects fail. And again, if you go out and Google it and you dig in on any of those sites, you'll see that there really isn't any root cause. So what we did was we started talking about the first piece is the project successful or not? So it's more of a binary metric, yes or no. And then what we started to see was, okay, if we were to grade the chances of how successful, or what are the chances of the project succeeding, that's what we came up with, and we called that our project success rate. So what we did is in the measure phase, we built a CTQ tree, critical to quality, and we broke it into three pieces: project management, project success, and business success. The next step we did was we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so we decided to use the Project Management Institute PMBOK guide and take a look at the process from that perspective. So we'll do the typical initiate, plan, execute, control, and close the project, and we'll use that as the baseline for our process. The second piece that we did in the measure phase was to go out and look at all these different data sets, and we broke the data sets into four different pieces: consultants, pollsters, software companies, and then trade organizations. And then what we wanted to find out again was there's your range from 25 to 75%, with your 50% of the projects falling in there. And then what we wanted to see was there really a difference in the statistical difference in between these four groups? And what we found out was there really was no statistical significance between the four groups. So that was just going to maybe potentially take us down a path to look at those four different areas to see if there was a difference. The next thing we wanted to do was establish our process capability. So we were again, given all the data that was there, we were basically at a 0.62 sigma. The next step in the analyze phase was to go and look at the value add for the different steps of the PMBOK process. So you have these knowledge areas within each step. And what we wanted to do is we said, okay, well, non-value added activities are red, meaning the customer or the stakeholders don't necessarily care about them. Things that are required by the business, we put in yellow. And then things that were truly value add, we put in green. And then the other thing that we found was that we started to notice that maybe some of the questions we could ask is, are planning and executing of projects a different skill set? Financial institution that I worked at, there were different teams that did the planning and a different team that did the execution. And then the other thing is if, every time an organization does a project, it's almost like it's the first time they've ever done it. So these are some themes that started to early in the analyze phase. Then we also went and did the old 5Y, and to really mine the data. So we used a tool called Data Miner AO, or I'm sorry, IO, and we had, and again, we have over 546 million returns on project failure. So what we did was we pulled this data into R, and we did a word cloud, and then we said, okay, well, individual words, clearly if you're doing a search on project, your project management, the word project is going to come up. So it's really about potentially the 2 to 5 word combinations. So what we found out was that as we started to get into the 5 whys, we really started to see 4 themes emerge. One was the success factors. What are those things that make a project successful? The second one was, on the flip side of that, what are the things that will make sure your project is doomed? The third thing was control factors. What are those things that need to be controlled that will guide the project to success? So in Six Sigma terms, we might call those X's. And then the warning signs. What are proactive indicators that a project may be heading in the wrong direction? So we took these themes and we continued to build on them as we move from analyze into improve. And again, in the analyze phase, we found that all these things that you would see in here are certainly things that people would say, scope management, setting expectations, lack of use of project controls, no management of risk or non-aggressive management of risk. But I think all those root causes are well known. They're just not necessarily how to solve for them maybe isn't known. So again, we wanted to take the Six Sigma DMAIC approach and say, okay, now that we feel like we have the root cause, what are the countermeasures of those root causes? So an organization would say, or PMI might say, well, you should implement organizational project management. And when you do that, you start to ask things like, how are PMs positioned in your company? Who owns projects? What are the interfaces between the P's? And by the P's, we mean programs, portfolios, and projects. What are the practices and who develops them? Who owns them? What are the performance metrics? And it's not that any of those things are bad, or implementing organizational project management is bad. But if everyone's out there doing it, everyone has a PMO, why isn't it working? Why do all these projects still fail? And you start to ask, again, more questions come up as you start to deep dive. Do you manage or do you execute projects? And we'll talk about potentially what the difference between those two things is. So there was a guy here that came up with this idea. He said, why don't we just end projects? And I'm sure PMI has a hit out on this guy. But when he went through and he started talking about, projects and project managers and all this other stuff, this term organizational project traditions came up. And that was the first time we saw this come up, this term organizational project traditions. And we started to think, again, there's that old thing, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And it starts to really ask a lot of questions. When you look at organizations and they lay people off at the end of the year, a lot of times it's the project managers that get laid off. So we started thinking about all these things, these organizational project traditions, and we started coming up with some ideas on what it would take to improve and on some of these traditions. And we started to say, okay, well, who really owns the projects? Or who has maybe ownership isn't even the right word, but who has the most interest perhaps in the projects? And what we really came up with were there's really 2 groups. One is the PMs and one is the stakeholders. So, and the stakeholders is kind of broad, but what we wanted to do was we wanted to do a customer experience map for both of those to get some idea of, again, where are the failure modes? And what we came up with, this is an example of a persona that we created for the PM. And you can see here, the age range, marital status, where they are, We're in Charlotte, North Carolina, so we just use that as an example. They're experienced, and they're kind of a lot of times known as a project geek. So they're seen as a leader, communicator, decision maker. These are their motivations. So we'll measure these motivations against other stakeholders or other personas. But you can see here that what they're really interested in, a lot of times you talk to a PM and they're all about the process. I got to follow the process. I love my tools. And these are their goals. They want to successfully complete projects within the triple constraint. They want to move up in the organization, and they want to work on bigger, better, more strategic projects. Their frustrations are that they have they have accountability but no authority, and there's not really a career path. We'll come back to the Myers-Briggs here in a second, but this is the Myers-Briggs view. They're normally more extroverts. They're normally more sensing, more thinking, and more judging. So we said John is a mid-career professional who potentially came to PM accidentally, worked in a variety of roles until it was suggested he become a PM, and he wants to succeed, but he's landed in a rut of traditional project management. So again, this was a tool that we used to start to maybe dig a little bit deeper around what are those root causes and what could those countermeasures be. And this was an example of the customer journey map for the project manager here's the process. Again, the standard PM process up here. What are the goals of each phase for the customer, the project manager? What are their touch points and emotional responses? What are they thinking? What is their overall experience? And then potentially, and this is where the improvement started to come out in the improved phase was, tracing this back again to the process. So one of the things that we came up with as an umbrella that falls underneath of all these different ideas is we came up with something that we started to call our project performance process. And this was just a name and a logo that we gave to it that would encompass all those things. So when we talk about this, want to take a step back and say, okay, when you think about initiatives, strategic initiatives and executing, given our Lean Six Sigma history, we created this value chain that we call the strategic initiatives value chain. And what that means is, the projects are down here, but if you think of all the things that you need to do as an organization to make sure that you successfully succeed in your projects, it starts with developing your vision and mission, developing a strategy, establishing a PMO, having a process to realize your strategy and do initiative planning, and then actually get into the project management. So we have some other services that we provide, for example, around establishing the PMO. We use the 7-step process to design and roll out a PMO, and we use this PMO maturity cube to help organizations measure the maturity of their PMO and see where they need to go from a gap perspective. And this is our strategy realization and initiative planning process. Again, many times organizations, they may even have a PMO, but they don't really have a process that converts strategy into projects and execution. So we have a tool that we use. We take up the organizations through this process that ultimately leads to this 3P, or this project performance process. So what did we do to this project performance process? This is not really, again, we're not necessarily reinventing the wheel. You notice the steps haven't changed. They're still the same steps. But what they are is they're a series of tools and techniques that could either build on or replace the traditional PMI. So if you think back to that process map with the value add and the non-value add, you really don't get a whole lot of value, obviously, from doing those non-value add activities. So we're going to talk about some things here. When we post this deck up to the website, it won't have the next page graphic on it, because that's really the secret sauce. But we take all these steps and we wrap it in a health check that we have that we use, which is a tool that continuously evaluates the health of the project through the different phases. So again, the secret sauce, this is our initiate, plan, execute, control, and close. And again, these are techniques or tools that we've built into these different steps here. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to walk you through. We don't have time today to go through each one. I'm just going to address the ones that are in red to give you some flavor. And what we found is, as we continue to roll this out to different organizations, what we're trying to look at is, if each one of these is an X, how much does it really contribute to the success of the project? So we clearly have taken these techniques, which have greatly succeeded as individual pieces, and we've kind of combined using not only some of the analytical tools, but also our experience in the past with project success. So what I like to do is just go through these ones here that are in red, and we'll walk you through some of the examples of what these are. So the first one is the change equation risk analysis. And we talk about here in the plan phase, enhanced risk management, but this is really in the beginning when you're initiating the project. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to switch over to, this is the template that we use. And you may have heard the change equation is R equals D times V times F. And the goal here really is to say the resistance, which you measure by looking at your stakeholders and looking at their attitude and their influence, has to be less than the D times V times F. And dissatisfaction is how dissatisfied are you with the current state. So if people are happy with the way things are, it's probably going to be very difficult to change. Vision is, do you have a vision for where you want to go in the future state? So if everybody's like, hey, yeah, things are really bad, but I don't really know where I want to go, it's probably not going to succeed very well. And then the last one, F, is the first steps. Does the management team have any idea about the first steps that they want to take along that journey? And that helps build confidence. So when you go through this, you just select these different drop downs here, moderate, clear future state example, first steps are unknown, some vision into the first steps, and so on and so forth. And then you rate the different stakeholders for attitude, strongly opposed versus strongly in favor, and influence. How much influence do they have? And when you do that, it will tell you, for example, here, that the resistance right now is greater than D times V, so you have to come up with a stakeholder action plan. And then very similar to a failure mode effects analysis, you come in here, it brings this data over, you can put in your key issues, how you're going to mitigate it, and then what the target's change in attitude will be. And then over here, it'll tell you what your new R score is going to be. So we've lowered it, and now we'll be good to go, after we do all these things. So this is really, it incorporates two things here. One, actually three things. It incorporates risk management, it incorporates stakeholder management, and it also incorporates this change equation and uses that as a baseline to come up with this calculation. So we found that, again, if this is done, going back to the process map here, this is done in the initiate phase. It can be done simultaneously with when you're doing the charter, but it also kind of takes the stakeholder management piece, makes it a little bit more simpler and a little bit more efficient. So that's the piece in the initiate phase that I wanted to take a look at there. The second thing I want to look at is what we call here in the plan phase is called Monte Carlo. And Monte Carlo simulation, we could do a whole 5-hour seminar on Monte Carlo simulation. But basically what it is, it's a statistical tool, an analytical tool that will let you simulate a project. And what we mean by this is we're going to use a very simple example here because we don't have a lot of time. But a lot of times when you're doing project scheduling, and oh, by the way, this can be used for project budgeting as well. A lot of times, let's say you have a project plan, or what people love to call a project plan, project schedule, whether it's a Microsoft project or not. But, people will go through and they'll guess at the number of days, or they'll do whatever they're going to do. And ultimately, what always happens is when you go through this, what you'll see is that, tasks have different distributions. So if you take the time to figure out how you're going to figure, the time for your different tasks. A simple way, for example, would be, here's three examples. One is this is going to be between 20 and 30 days. So we use a random number to generate that. This one says, well, it's usually 15 days, but could be sometimes much longer. And then this one is probably the easiest one to use, which most people are familiar with, which is a triangular distribution. So here we're saying the task will take a minimum of 10 days. More than likely, it'll take 25 days and a maximum of 40. So the difference between, if you do this and you come up with these numbers, and these are pretty precise, obviously, but if you just round them up to even single digits, you come up with 92 days. And that's one way to say, okay, well, I could throw out the number here. Hey, at least I've taken 3 days, or I've taken the distribution, I've added it up, and I've come out with 92 days. And what we're going to find here is that if you use Monte Carlo distribution, you're getting one view, you're getting one shot at this to come up with a total. But what if I simulated based on these distributions? And again, here this only means this is a tool called Monte Carlito. It's built in Excel. But basically what I'm going to do here is I'm going to simulate the distribution of these tasks 1,000 times. And for 1,000, it'll be pretty quick. But you can see as it runs through here, it'll go through and it'll give you a plot. And what it will show here is, when I originally do my calculations, I come up with, and I say, okay, well, I'm going to do 90 days. And, that's what we're really showing here, is that if this is telling me that I have about a 50% chance of success at about 69 days. And imagine if I came in and I said, okay, well, a lot of times you want to do contingency planning. So if you went back to your boss and said, well, if I had 150 days, or 100, out here 100, even 133, if I almost double the size of the project, the duration of the project, I'll have a 100% chance of success. Well, obviously nobody's going to go for that. But what if you even said, hey, if I added 30 days to this project and went out to, say, 90 days, I would have almost 50% more chance of success. Or even if you said, what if I just added 20 days to 85? Now I have a 25% greater chance of success. So by doing this helps you decide and answer the question of how much contingency should I plan or should I ask for? And again, you can do a variety of things. You can run more than 1,000, and you're just going to get a denser graph. But you can run 10,000, a million, whatever. You can run it overnight, however you want to do. But again, the idea would be that at the end of the day, you're using this to simulate multiple runs with multiple combinations of the project. And obviously, the more tasks that there are, the more complicated it is. But again, it's just a technique that we've used in the past for both scheduling and budgeting. And again, at least now you're having a different conversation about, what are our chances of success? At 75 days, my chance is about 50%. If I want to go up a little bit higher, what can I do to, how many days could I add? And then what are the costs potentially of those days? So that's the Monte Carlo piece. The next one here, and I'm going to jump back into PowerPoint, is and what we call our enhanced risk management. And what we mean by this is we use a variety of tools. We use the change risk assessment that you saw in the beginning in the initiate phase. And then we have a variety of other templates that we use to come up with what potential risks could be. So we have a FMEA, failure mode effects analysis. We have a change risk assessment. We have what we call standard project risks. And then we have an implementation risk. And what we do is we pull all that into a tool that helps us not only, we identify the top 20% risk from each one, and we pull those into this kind of master risk tool that we have. And that helps us do two things. One, it helps us plan mitigations. And then the second thing it also does is it starts to lay out a contingency for both schedule and budget again, so that we can start to tie, the results of the simulation and kind of use that to validate it. But ultimately, again, it's the goal here is to do a very comprehensive view of the risk and also use it for contingency planning, again, for budget and time. So again, it's just something that we do. It's a little bit different. And again, by really aggressively and enhancing that risk management, it tends to do really well for us as we move forward in the project. The next one is the Myers-Briggs, and people have heard about this, and again, this is another one of those things that you can do to increase your chances of success. So we built this success profile that you see, this grid here that's in green, yellow, and red, is for project managers. And what we're saying is people who fall in the green have a high chance of succeeding as a project manager. Now, does that mean that if you're an INFP that you cannot be a project manager? No, of course not. We can train anybody in project management. But what that really means is if I really want my project to succeed, why would I pick somebody that is not completely suited for those most important projects? When we do this, when we do project management training, we plot everybody's results. And long ago, I learned to just use the stars and not identify, because everybody wants to know, where did I land? But again, this is just another tool that can be used. Is your project definitely going to succeed if you have somebody who's in the STJ? Well, not 100%, but again, this is just another one of those additive things that you can use to ensure that, again, you have a greater chance of project success. The next tool we have, we borrowed from a company called Afterburner. They're a bunch of fighter pilots, and they came up with this stealth debrief. And this is for lessons learned. So the first thing I'll say about lessons learned is do them. What always happens is the stuff never gets done, and lessons learned never happens. And then people always say, well, again, why are things always the same? If you're going to do it, regardless of what technique you use, what you'll see here is they have stealth is, of course, an acronym. Set the start time and location. The tone is nameless, rankless. Execution versus objectives. This is what was supposed to happen, what actually happened. Analyze the execution errors, the cause of each error and the success and the root cause. Document the lessons learned, transfer those lessons learned through the organization, and end on a high note. And again, if you're going to do lessons learned, the most important thing is record them, but also change something as a result of the lessons learned. So for example, you can see here, this is a tool they had, what was the result? What was the cause? What was the root cause? What was the lesson learned? SPA is single point of accountability. Who owns fixing this fix? Who owns fixing this root cause? And that's really the most important thing, is that you say as an organization, hey, we had this issue, we found out why, and we're not going to repeat that in the next project. And then you have a mechanism, a transfer mechanism, to move that through the whole organization. So again, you don't have to use the stealth debrief. I just, it's cool, stealthy. But the thing is, first of all, do lessons learned, document them, and then make sure that you fix the issues. So as we close up here, the final piece to doing projects differently is to think about it from this perspective. Projects deliver capabilities. They don't deliver what I call project deliverables. And what I mean by that is a charter is a project deliverable. The document itself is a project deliverable. There's no value that the customer gets from the charter. Don't be confused by, hey, if I complete all my templates, the project is complete. Completing the templates is an output. So it's not work effort. Hey, we did a lot of work. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it has to be tangible, beneficial outcomes that can be measured in a meaningful way for the organization to say, hey, I have new capabilities. So again, thank you for your attendance today. We'll be posting this up to our website, and we'll be sharing the deck there as well. Thank you, and be healthy and safe.